Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the second installment of the Virtual Alumni Speaker Series. Our topic today is storytelling in the creative process and will be moderated by Blythe Haaga Parker, class of 2001, who's currently a director and producer on season 2 of Showtime's Work in Progress. Our guest is Alec Berg, class of 1987, who wrote, directed, and produced amazing TV shows like Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Silicon Valley, and Barry. Please feel free to type any questions you have for Alec in the chat. We'll have plenty of time at the end to run through them. You can also put them in the Q&A feature, but people usually like to just put them in the chat directly. And so without further ado, Alec Berg and Blythe Haaga Parker.
Thank you. Alec, thanks for doing this. This is so amazing, and I am super fan, so I'll try to translate that into great questions instead of sitting agog at the wonder of Alec.
So far this is going fantastically.
Oh, good. So I will go chronologically mostly, but I do want to reference in that clip show that we just saw, there is a moment in Seinfeld where Alec Berg, the character, is discussed. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that was just a joke in the office that Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld really enjoyed doing this John Houseman impression. And at some point they realized that my name sounded good as a John Houseman name. And so every time I would walk around in the office, I would hear them saying my name that way. And then, you know, TV, especially, we would do 22 or 24 episodes of that show every year. And it's like anything that works on any level just goes into the show. And so it was one of those things where Larry and Jerry were writing that episode. And I think they were stuck for a joke. And they were just like, well, we were just doing this 5 minutes ago and it was funny. Put that in.
That's great. A lot of the bits from the writer's room made it to screen eventually.
Oh, it's just a voracious beast that just eats material, a show like that. So anything that you think works on any level, you know. And also it's funny how many names you have to come up with for characters, right? Like, I mean, every week there's, you know, whatever, 6 or 8 new characters that need names.
And then get them cleared.
Yeah, well,
who says okay?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the rule, right, for clearances, there have to be like none of them or more than 5 of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my least favorite part of the whole process, is the clearances, where there's so many more important things to worry about than what that guy's name is.
Right. No, totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Okay, as promised, I want to start with Polly, because here we are.
Okay.
If I were to ask, imagine yourself, 6th grade Polly student Alec Berg, what do you want to be when you grow up? Would you say, I want to be an Emmy-nominated writer, director, producer of comedic television? Or would you have said something else at the time?
I like to think at the very least I would have said I want to be an Emmy-winning writer, producer, and director.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I don't feel like being nominated is like what you strive for. Like, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, nobody wants to drive like and see the parking lot of the Louvre. Like, at some point, like, you don't dream of that. Like, if you're gonna go all the way, you may as well go inside.
We'll check back in.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know that, and you know, I started Polly in 6th grade. I certainly didn't have like a plan, but I had always been kind of a comedy nerd. So that was just something that I was interested in.
Who were some of your influences? Who were some of those folks?
I don't even know if I'm allowed to say it anymore, but honestly, Bill Cosby was probably the single biggest influence comedically.
Yeah.
Not in any other way.
I'm writing that down.
Your Honor, I said comedically. But my parents had a bunch of Bill Cosby albums when I was 6 or 8 years old. And for whatever reason, like, that's just what I would put on. And I would listen to those over and over. And I was like an 8-year-old kid living in Boulder, Colorado. And I could do, 3 hours word perfect about what it was like to grow up black on the streets of Philadelphia, which was weird.
Sure.
And still is. But and then I started getting into Steve Martin was the other one that, like, you know, again, like over and over and over, I would listen to those records. And Bob Newhart and then Woody Allen. So for whatever reason, comedy was like my music when I was a kid. And so that was a thing I was excited about, but I don't think it ever occurred to me that that was a job.
Sure.
And then we moved to Pasadena from Boulder when I was 10. So entered 6th grade. That's why I ended up at Poly. And being in Pasadena, you know, it's not a company town, but it is certainly peripheral.
Yeah.
And, you know, I knew people like Stephen J. Cannell's kids, you know, went to Poly, and Ted Griffin, who's still a close friend of mine, was 2 years younger. I guess technically he still is 2 years younger. But at the time, his mom worked in the business. And so the first time I was ever on a set was his mom was working on the TV version of Fame. So we went to visit her, and I got on those sets, and that actually was on what is now the Sony lot where Barry and Silicon Valley are shot. And that was the MGM lot back in the day. So that was, you know, that was the place. So it was a combination of sort of being vaguely interested in comedy, not as a job, but just as a thing. And then I had a sense being close to show business that like, oh, people actually do that. And then really when I got to college and I started doing more filmmaking and I started writing for the Harvard Lampoon, that's when, and people who were 5, 8, 10 years older were all professional comedy writers. And it started to sort of gel that like, oh, I don't actually have to get a job. I can try and do that.
Right. Yeah, that's great. You mentioned Ted Griffin. Did you work together? Did you make projects together while you were in high school, or was it, you know, more
Well, he was way ahead of me in terms of his level of sophistication and actually like having the wherewithal to do things. He and I made and I have it somewhere. I could. Paper about Noah's Ark for we were studying the Bible in Mr. Vedro's English class, and instead of writing a paper, Ted and I made a video of it saying my connection is unstable. I hope I'm still there.
Froze briefly, but I wasn't sure I was frozen.
Okay, I'm sure it was me. Ted Griffin and I made a video of actually a Bill Cosby bit about Noah's Ark. And so that was the first thing that I actually like sort of wrote and produced and edited. And then short story called Mr. Big. Is it like sort of a Raymond Chandler? I hope I'm not freezing. Oh, you're back.
Okay, yeah. You're freezing a little bit.
Now I've got your face, but not your voice.
Oh no.
Oh, now you're back.
Okay.
Oh no. You're gonna have to email me these things. But anyway, so yeah, Ted and I, you know, Ted was light years ahead of where I was at that point. He was much more sophisticated about editing and shooting and stuff. I mean, Ted really knew like that's where he was headed, you know, and I think his uncle and his mom and his grandfather were all in show business. So that was very inspiring just to go, oh, okay, wait, that's an actual thing that you can do. And, you know,
that's very cool.
Yeah.
And I think too, I mean, you know, all along the pathway, you meet people that you want to work with. And I know at Harvard, you met your writing team, which was a team of 3, which is very unique, right?
Yeah. Well, Jeff Schaefer and Dave Mandel. Yeah. Well, Jeff Schaefer and I are the same class year, and Dave Mandel is 1 year behind us. So Jeff and I graduated, and then we both realized, you know, he was pre-med and sort of on track to, his dad's a doctor, and it just was always sort of like, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then I think college is good for figuring out what you want to do, but also it's very important for figuring out what you don't want to do. And I think he realized that, the same as what I was saying, that like, wait, I can be an obnoxious, funny jerk off, and that actually pays money.
Yeah.
So we kind of both figured out that we would like to at least try. So we packed up his car and we drove to LA, and we worked together as a team for a few years. And then Dave Mandel had graduated and he had gone to work for Saturday Night Live. And he had done 3 years at Saturday Night Live and was kind of burning out there right when Jeff and I had gotten hired at Seinfeld.
Yeah.
So we got tired of listening to him complain about how, toxic the environment was at Saturday Night Live. And so we said, why don't you move to LA and complain about how toxic the environment is here?
Right.
And so, so we ended up working together on Seinfeld. And then when Seinfeld ended, we sort of started officially taking jobs as a 3-person team, which you would think like there are a lot of 2-person teams and there aren't a whole lot of 3-person teams. And everyone would always ask, like you did, like, well, how does that work?
Yeah.
And the thing that was weird is it was so much easier. Because with a 2-person team, you get into a lot of these situations where it's like, well, I think it should be, this, and you think it should be that. And it's like, okay, well, now what? Whereas with a 3rd person, if 2 people had strongly opposed ideas, it's almost like the 3rd person was watching a trial or a tennis match where they're just watching both people and they're going, okay, I understand, I hear you. And then the 2 people would argue, and then you just turn to the 3rd person and go, so what is it?
Yeah. That's great.
And I always used to joke that my 2 partners, Jeff and Dave, were probably much more diametrically opposed in sort of their styles and their viewpoints.
Yeah.
So they would argue about stuff all day, and I would get to make all the decisions.
I love it.
So for me, it was great.
Yeah. That's a power spot. That's great.
Yeah.
So what was it like breaking into the business? Because I will say, I think that certainly every path is different. Sometimes people see your career now and think, there was no period before this. There was no period before Seinfeld or Conan. So tell me a little bit about the period before all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, the tremendous advantage of being, 21 or 22 and moving to LA is you can live on virtually nothing. And so that's what I did. My partner, Jeff, and I, and a couple other friends of ours from college rented a place kind of near where the Grove is now, but there was no Grove there at the time. It literally flea infested apartment, jammed on top of each other in this place. We lived down the street from the 99-cent store. And so for the first 3 months I was in LA, every meal I had cost 99 cents. I don't know how I didn't get scurvy. But, we had nothing, but it was kind of awesome.
Yeah.
It was just fun. Like, LA is one of those very aspirational places where like everyone our age who lived in LA had just moved there from wherever.
Yeah.
And we met people who wanted to be actors, wanted to be dancers, wanted to be, writers, producers, directors. And a lot of the people that I'm still very close with, like agents, especially, like people who now run agencies or run studios, they were like that weird guy I met at a party who was picking his nose, when we were 21 years old. And so there's this kind of cool thing where you kind of have like your freshman class.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are now like, ridiculously powerful people who were in my freshman class.
Right.
But so we moved, Jeff and I realized that we basically, we always wanted to be TV writers. And in order to write TV, you have to be in a room together writing the show. And so we knew we had to physically be in LA to do that. So we moved here to that apartment and we just started, we had a few scripts that we had written, like samples, and we just started calling anyone and everyone we could think of and just saying, hey, we're new in town. We really want to, we'd call writers we respected cold and just go, we really love your work. Love to talk to you for 15 minutes, buy you coffee, just ask you how you did it. you know,
Right.
what you think we could do. And it just started. I mean, it's all just this kind of slow building of a coalition,
Yeah.
right? Where you meet somebody and they go, oh, I don't have any way of helping you, but I know a guy who knows a woman who just got a show, and maybe I'll call him to call her. And if she's looking, you know, and you just keep building these micro connections and kind of building up this, you know, ideally force of goodwill,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and you're just looking for some weakness, you know, in the, you know, in the, it's like a, you know, it's like a bathysphere. It goes down and it's under pressure, and you're just looking for some crack to
Yep.
get in there. And that's really what it was. It was a span of 2 or 3 years of like, we got to know these guys, Tom Gamble and Max Pross, who had a show and they couldn't afford to hire a writing staff. So they offered to buy one freelance script from us, and we worked our butts off and we did a really good job. I like to think at that. And then that show went down, but a year later they were working at Seinfeld. And in the interim, we had met people that hired, you know, and it was one of those things where I think until we got hired at Seinfeld, and that was about 3 years after I moved out here, that was like getting made in the Mafia.
Right.
That was like the day where it's just like, okay, now we are professionals and we are sort of on the inside.
Yeah.
But before that, I didn't have a job that lasted longer than 13 weeks.
Right. Well, I mean, you never know what shows are going to go, whether it's like a pilot that doesn't end up going, or that,
Yeah.
you know, what's going to happen, cancellation.
Yeah, no. It's this constant thing of like stepping on lily pads and hoping they hold your weight, right?
Science on the side, it's not the steadiest business.
No, I mean, it really was like by the time you learned the name of everyone in the office, you were fired.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like, what's her name? Lisa? Okay, get out.
And you were at Conan in the days when it was particularly like that, like, are we going to get canceled?
Yeah. That was the job. We had worked on a show, everyone's favorite show, Herman's Head. I can't hear the applause, but I'm sure there's applause going on.
The thing with webinars is like, it's happening. We just
Yeah. Oh no, I just sense a wall of approving applause. Anyway, Herman's Head. Say it again. Hold for applause. And that show had for some reason gotten canceled. And then we were sort of people without a country, and because of Dave Mandel in New York, who was working at Saturday Night Live, Dave had introduced us to a guy named Robert Smigel, who does Triumph the Info. I mean, he's like a legendary sort of genius comedy writer, and he was the head writer at Conan. And so Dave said to Robert Smigel, hey, you should take a look at these guys. And so we wrote up some ideas and we sent them, we never heard. And then Robert Smigel kind of called us out of the blue. And so Herman's Head went down and we packed up and we moved to New York for like 3 months. And yeah, it was like right as Conan was like just getting up enough airspeed to take off. But every day at that show, we were like, well, we're all fired. Like if it's not today, it's tomorrow. So there was like a tremendous freedom.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Where it was just like, if you have any ideas, don't save them till next week. Like if you ever want to see it on TV, let's do it now.
Every week is your last. Like.
Yeah. And that was a blast, but that was a young person's game, that one, because we did 5 days a week. No talk show has ever done 5 days a week. And we were doing 15 minutes of produced material a night, because that was really Conan's strength was bits.
So like things like that.
Yeah, sketches and like fake interviews and what we call desk pieces, which are like, viewer mail or whatever he could present from the desk. And then there was usually like a bigger sketch where he'd get up, or it would be a tape piece where you'd go out and do something.
Yeah, but all things that had to be pre-written versus like an interview that he could kind of stretch. It was like a ton of material that you were.
Yeah. And it was, so a lot of times, you'd look at, we had this big board that had all the cards of all like the opening piece, and then the act 4 sketch, and then we need a sketch here. We had this massive board, and you'd shoot an episode. You'd go live to tape at 5:30.
Okay.
And then at 6:30, the show is over and everyone would kind of wander back up to the office. And Usually, you know, between 6:30 and 9:30 or 10:30, everyone was wondering where Robert Smigel was. He was usually in the edit somewhere or doing something. And so around 10:30 or 11, you'd kind of get to work and you'd go, okay, what do we have for tomorrow? And you'd look at the board and there's nothing. You know, and it's 11 o'clock the night. I mean, occasionally you'd have a kernel of something, or like, you know, there'd be one thing that was semi-firm and you go, oh my God, thank God. At least we have that. But sometimes you wouldn't write a sketch until 2 or 3 in the morning. And then you'd call, what's that?
You become a vampire. You're just like,
it was 24 hours a day. And also 5 days a week. So you didn't even have, you know, like, and weekends you were doing like pre-tapes and stuff. So it was just relentless. But so you have an idea at 2:30 in the morning, and then you call the set people and the prop people and the casting people and the hair, makeup, and wardrobe people, and leave voicemails on all of their lines saying like, hey, we need, you know, we need 2 6'8" guys in lederhosen. You know, we need a woman with green hair. You need to build a plexiglass box that we can put a salamander in. I mean, it was bananas.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, it was also just like, it was such fun chaos. Yeah. But at the end of 4 months, like, I just physically, 4 months as like a 23-year-old, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I can't do this anymore. I was just, I mean, you know, literally running around 30 Rock.
Oh my gosh.
You know, but it was an awesome experience. But, you know, we moved back to LA for the next sort of hiring season of sitcom stuff, because that's really what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to get hired at Seinfeld. And, you know, like I said, that was like that was the moment.
That, to me, one of the hallmarks, and I think this too, I mean, there's such a difference between, I think, narrative and then, you know, what you do in late night, the shorter sketches and stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the hallmarks of, I think, your work, your current work, but also what you've done with Seinfeld and with Curb, story is clearly so important to you, and there's no detail left untouched. So if we see something early in the episode that we think means nothing, it absolutely means something, and you pay it off at the end. And but there's a meticulousness, not in the way we experience it, but in the way you can kind of tell if you're analyzing like how beautifully you construct your stories. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, you know, how did you learn stories? Is it something you just always knew, or did you pick it up along the way?
No, I mean, that's Larry David. That's where I learned it, is when Jeff and I got to Seinfeld.
Yeah.
You know, just getting to watch him work. I mean, I really learned, you know, from a master. Yeah. And I have no idea where he learned it.
Right.
Figured it out. Like, he might have just like intuited it, but you know, I mean, not to take anything away from Jerry, like you know, Jerry was immensely important, but that really dense kind of intertwining narrative structure, you know, and it's just a result of, it's just relentless rewriting. And, you know, when I got there, the other thing that's interesting about Seinfeld is that Seinfeld never had a writer's room the way that most shows do.
Yeah.
Larry and Jerry would sit in their office and they would work on episodes, and you would sit in your office. It was, I think, what probably the old studio system was like for writers, where they would just put writers under contract, you know, and there was just a building full of writers, and they would each sit in their own offices working on their own stuff. And you would wander from office to office going, oh, what are you working on? A Western? Cool, I'm doing a wrestling movie. And that's really weirdly what working at Seinfeld was like, is that Jeff and I would sit in our office, or we'd go walk around the lot, and Tom Gamble and Max Pross would be over here working on their thing, and Carol Leifer would be over here, and all the other writers would all be working on their own things. And you would come up with a bunch of sort of kernels of stories, right? I mean, generally the rule was you need kind of a story idea for each of the 4 main characters. And then you would try and catch Larry and Jerry when you could, and just go, hey, what do you think about, we had this idea that like George eats out of the trash, you know, and you go, that could be funny. Yeah, that's good. And we're like, okay, so we'll put that in the yes column. And you just had this board of like your ideas, and you would start thinking like, okay, we wanted to do a thing about George dating a girl whose mother really likes him, and he's talking about how he's really good talking to his girlfriend's mothers. Okay, what if he eats out of the trash at their house? Do you know what I mean? So you just start like connecting the kernels, and then it just keeps going like that and going like that. And, and then it's like, okay, well, what if the person that George is fighting with is the guy that's dating Elaine? And now you can connect those stories, and you just follow those things through. And we always sort of thought of it as like, it's just a big math problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But boy, just the learning curve in terms of what I would have thought an episode was, you'd outline an episode. Once you had sort of approved story ideas from Larry and Jerry, right, you'd outline what you thought was a first act.
Yeah.
Right. And you bring them in and you show them your board and you go, okay, here's what the first act is. It's this and this and this and this. And basically they'd go, no. The thing that you think is the end of the act, that's the second scene. Wow. And so you just compress it all. And then you go, okay, we got to keep building out. And then they'd come in and go, no, get to that faster. And you compress it, and you just keep adding and adding and adding and compressing and compressing. It's like, boiling down a stew or something where it just would get incredibly concentrated and incredibly dense.
Yeah.
And the fact that we were shooting these shows, we would shoot 28 or 29 minutes and we would air at 21 and a half minutes. So you would overshoot, and then in the edit, you would have to cut and cut and cut and cut. So that process continued through the whole, the whole post-production phase. And what it taught me is just, if it's not bolted down, it's going away. Like, it's just not going to live. So cut it now.
Yeah.
And so it just taught me to be ruthlessly efficient about, if there is not, if a scene doesn't have some piece of information in it that absolutely must be in the show or the show won't make sense, that scene's coming out.
Yeah.
And the other thing it taught me, it's, you mentioned this, there's nothing I love more than what you think is a silly joke that turns out to be an incredibly relevant plot point or character point. It's because we didn't have time for jokes, right? Yeah. Like, if you, like a joke that's a freestanding little island, if you're trying to cut, 30% of what you have to make an air date, or an air time, if it's cuttable, it's gone. So in order for things to live, they had to be relevant. So you'd figure out a way to make jokes that are like, okay, it seems like a joke, but that you can't cut that, because if that's not there, then you don't know who that guy is, right? Yeah. And if you don't know who that guy is, then when she does that, that doesn't make sense. So if you look at those Seinfeld episodes, like that density, and it continued in Curb, it's really Larry's comedic style. And it's something that I think he really, is responsible for. Like, it's a style of storytelling that was new.
Yeah. Yeah. How Larry is Larry? I think a lot of people wonder, like, is Larry?
For better and for worse, Larry is exactly the same guy that you would think he is.
Yeah.
I've run into so many people that know that I've worked with him. They have met him at a party or something, and they're like, is he doing a bit? Like, no, that's who he is. That's genuinely who he is. And, I mean this in a loving way. Like, he's not that much of an actor. Like, who he is on camera is, there are subtle differences. Like, I think real Larry obviously has to live in society. So TV Larry is sort of the fantasy version of real Larry. Like, real Larry wishes he could scream at that woman for being in front of him in line and taking too many samples of frozen yogurt and delaying everything. Like, real Larry is the guy stewing in the store and biting his tongue.
Yeah.
But he writes down in his notebook the idea. And the reason I think he keeps doing the show is it's his way of, like, exercising all of this, kind of rage at the morons out there, that it's like, I can't yell at this person, but I can hire an actress to play that person and I can yell at her.
And hopefully they're not watching and in a horror, like.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of people
have
seen, I don't know. I wasn't there when Larry wrote it in the book, so I don't know who a lot of these things are about, but I'm sure a lot of people watching Curb are like, oh my God, that was me.
I'm the coffee shop girl.
Yeah, for sure.
That's funny. I want to transition and talk a little bit about Silicon Valley and about Barry, your two, well, Silicon just ended, but Barry is still going, but those are your two current projects.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is Silicon Valley is such a terrific satire of the tech industry. And I've long wondered, like, how did people in the industry take it? How did they react to that?
I think it was a mixture. I think weirdly, like, people love seeing themselves on TV. Like, if you ask a heavy metal musician what the greatest movie ever made is, it's Spinal Tap.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. Yeah,
and Spinal Tap is not a flattering portrait
right.
of a metal band, right?
Yeah.
But people have somewhat of a sense of humor, and if you're
Sure.
honest about it,
yeah.
And if you show kind of the real version of who and what they are, people will cop to it and they'll go, yeah, all right, you got me. That's
Right.
So for whatever reason, at the beginning of Silicon Valley, there was this decision that we made that we want this all to be incredibly accurate and incredibly real. And it made it very hard sometimes, because as writers, we would go, oh, what if they do this or that? And we would surround ourselves with a huge number of tech advisors. In the course of a season, we would speak to, I think probably 65, 70 different people whose names would end up in the credits. If you watch the credits, like, there are probably 10 people listed on every episode as technical advisors. And so it made it very hard sometimes to write the show, right? Because we'd talk to some lawyer or an investor or an engineer, and they'd go, no, never happen. Impossible. So it became a bit of a negotiation sometimes, where you'd be like, okay, what if instead of doing that, we did, and you'd get these people going, I guess if they said it this way, maybe, or sometimes you'd make demands where you just go, and our head tech advisor, this guy, Jonathan Doughton, was kind of a genius at coordinating all of these other people. And we would just tell him, listen, you need to figure out a way that they can do this and then go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he'd go away and he'd come back sweating and he'd go, okay, I talked to 4 different people, and they say that as long as they don't technically say that it's this or that, I guess that's okay. And, or sometimes he'd come back and he'd go, okay, the only way it could happen is if they did this. And you'd go, that's so much better than what we had.
Right.
Right. So verisimilitude sometimes just gives you, it's just a better idea. It's real and it's better.
Yeah.
But also, the tech business is not a business that has a real sense of humor about itself. Right. So that was difficult at times. There were a lot of people who, like, a lot of people would want to tell me what we screwed up, or let me tell you what's wrong about your show. Or I'd talk to people and they go, okay, here's what you need to do to fix it.
Oh my God.
Right. And it wasn't like, hey, for my money. It was always like, here's what you need to, and they just expected me to go, oh, yes, I'm right on that.
And my mind is going to the hitmen community, telling you they're like, I don't know if you'd kill him that way.
Well, but that's the great thing, right?
Like, there's no other industry that would say like, oh.
Right. But there was a real tech industry, but they're wrong about themselves a lot. They're deluded. Like, I actually had a really interesting conversation with a very, very successful woman who I will not name because she's a friend. But after season 1 of Silicon Valley, we did an episode at the end of season 1 where they go to this big tech conference, TechCrunch Disrupt. And I had a conversation with this woman after the season had ended, and she was very upset with us because we had completely screwed up the representation of women in Silicon Valley. And there's no women on that team, and you didn't put any women here, and why were there no women there? And the way that you shot that tech conference, like, with all those extras, there was that crowd scene, there was not a single woman. You didn't put a single woman in there. And I said, we took cameras to the real conference. That's real. What we shot, what you're complaining about, that shot, that giant shot that's all dudes, that's real. We didn't frame women out.
Right.
That's what it is. And so, I mean, that was one of the interesting conversations kind of constantly on that show is what response, oh no, is that me? Oh no, sorry. All right, snubbed him. Like how, to what degree are we responsible for trying to portray Silicon Valley as it should be versus how it is, you know? And we had, I mean, this was probably the longest running and most intense conversation we had on a regular basis is, as a satire, are we justified in portraying an industry? I mean, and the stats are pretty galling, right? Like, you know, engineers in Silicon Valley are, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's 83% men. Partner level in VC firms, there are, I think, 4% women. I mean, it is a male world up there, which is not to say that's right, or it makes it better, or I don't wish it were different, but as a satire, our whole goal was to sort of hold a mirror up to that and portray it as a completely weird, dysfunctional, misogynist, you know, messed up place. And so and again, this is one of these things where, like, if we got it right, I'm glad. If we screwed it up, I'm sorry, we tried, you know, and you're never going to make everybody happy. But it was one of those interesting things where I think I had kind of two reactions from people. One is, you whiffed it. And then one was, you guys got it so right, it's crazy. And I know that person who says you whiffed it, and that person's a jerk. Which are those are the people I prefer to talk to, obviously. Oh, and the third reaction, which I loved, was that a lot of people said, you know, I've been telling my husband for 4 years about how these meetings work. And,
funny.
And he finally gets it.
Oh, that's
he
fantastic.
saw. And then they would say, you know what? I can't watch the show. It makes me nauseous. And that to me was like a great compliment. It's like, oh, that's, you know, I don't seek to make people nauseous, but if I'm making people nauseous because they're like, oh God, I can't watch this because it feels like I'm there, you know, that was complimentary, you know, nausea.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, and it feels like the industry changed in the years that you were making the show. So they went
night and day.
Disruptors.
Night and day. It's like, we got there at a really interesting inflection point where when we started that show, everyone in the tech business was strutting around like, you're welcome, world. You know, like the Arab Spring had just happened. And so it's like, you know, Twitter literally saved freedom in the universe. And over the span of the show, it went from these people who were impossibly smug about how amazing their contributions to, you know, the global society were, to, I think a lot of people now are kind of thinking like, did we break the world? I think we might have like unraveled the fabric of society. Like, this is bad. But what's interesting is it made the show very different to write, because in the beginning, it really was a show about like, oh, we're just trying to poke these arrogant jerks and like, kind of like, you know, try and, you know, like give them some humility. Like, that's who we were making fun of, is the arrogant. And at the end, it was like, it actually weirdly became a show about people who were literally trying to save the world. Which made it a lot harder to just be light and fun.
Right, totally.
You know? Like, it actually had real stakes. And, you know, I think we ended the show when we had to end the show. Like, I think it would be very hard. You know, like Dave Mandel, my former partner, ran Veep for the last few years. And I think he would have a similar, you know, outlook at politics, where it's just like, you can't do a comedy like that anymore, given where we've been.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. The truth of it is,
Yeah. And you have a real responsibility to comment on that and to take sides. And it makes just being light and nimble and fun very difficult.
So you chose another light subject matter of killing people professionally.
Sure.
So yeah, let's talk about Barry, because I adore Barry, and it's such
Thank you.
and funny, like, it's an idea where if you were to describe it, you know, it's about a hitman, like it doesn't inherently have the comedy juices.
Oh, it
going.
sounds terrible.
It's deeply dark, but
Yeah.
it's so funny.
Yeah. I mean, I was so happy when it actually finally made it on the air, because for however long I had been saying, okay, here's what I'm working on. It's not as bad as it sounds.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, it is one of those that's like hard to describe and say, but it's funny, you know, I promise.
Yeah, I hope, but I also hope it's, I mean, that's what we tried for, is like,
and all of the other things.
yeah, I mean, we were sort of hoping, like, let's see if we can do this. I mean, it just was sort of an experiment, you know, like Bill Hader and I were, you know, initially, like the kernel of it that I think was interesting was he was at SNL, and he's a very anxious guy, and he had a very hard time doing live TV because he would have panic attacks. Yeah. But he's clearly stunningly gifted at it.
Right.
And so he had this kind of internal battle where it was like, everybody's telling me that I would be crazy to leave this, and that, like, and it's true, it just was so natural for him, but it was killing him.
Yeah.
And so that dilemma seemed like a really interesting thing. And so that was kind of where we jumped off. And we started writing one idea, and ultimately it just didn't have any stakes to it. And it was like, we kept thinking like, well, who cares about this? We were like, okay, well, what's, just as an exercise, like what's something that's like a big, like what's like a life or death thing? Yeah. And he was like, well, what about life and death? Like, what if I play a hitman? And immediately it was like, oh, but hitmen are so cliche. And then I was like, yeah, but that could work for us, right? Like, it's not like a guy in a cool skinny tie and sunglasses. It's me. Like, I'm not cool. So if I play a hitman, and we like the idea of like playing a hitman like a traveling salesman, or like something where it's just like, this is not a good job. Like, you know, and he's kind of stuck in this rut, and he flies coach and sits in the middle seat and has to travel to Akron. And we started playing with that. And I was like, okay, well, that's like a dismal thing. But like, you know, if we're saying that he's meant to do that, but he doesn't like doing it, what does he want to do? And then we were like, well, what's the opposite of being a hitman? Like, what's something that would seem like totally frivolous? And we landed on this idea of like, you know, what if he wants to be an actor? And then immediately we started running into all these really interesting, like, kind of parallels where it's like, a hitman has to be anonymous. An actor wants to be known by everyone. Right. A hitman has to stifle all of his emotions and not allow it to bubble up. An actor is paid to access their emotions and bring them forward. Right. And then it was like the most obvious one was like, a hitman wants to live in the dark. An actor literally has to find the light. Yeah. And so we, you know, it just started to sort of like steamroll from there, and we found all this interesting stuff. Yeah. But what I loved about it was easy. It's kind of like at Silicon Valley, the thing that it was about, that it was based on, was Mike Judge's experience creating Beavis and Butthead, where he sat in his garage in Austin and he made these silly cartoons. And all of a sudden, Sumner Redstone and David Geffen, these two billionaires, were bidding on this thing. And he didn't know who to sell it to or whether to hang on to it. And so once we figured out that that's what Silicon Valley is about, it's this thing of like, you know, Richard Hendricks was the keeper of this flame, right? And it's like, he could sell it, but they might misuse it, but he can keep it, but it might go out. Like, you know, everything always came back to that, that idea. And it's the same with Barry, that it just helps. It's like a kind of helpful, like, signpost, you know, in writing, where it's just, if this is about a guy who is trying to do both, right? You know, but he can't. Yeah. And how's it going to end? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a perfect tension between the two, as you said. Yeah. It just was, again, it was like, and it was one of those things where we were just sort of spitballing, you know, and I always say, like, Bill Hader, like, there was no plan. There was no like, okay, we're going to do this and this and this. It really is, the analogy I always use is, it's two idiots standing at a piano, you know, just hitting notes. You go, what about this? No. What if it were lower? No, wrong, higher, you know? And I can't tell you, like, I know nothing about music,
Mhm.
I can't tell you theory or chords or what notes form a chord, but if you play me a chord, I can tell you if it sounds good or not.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, or you just go, something's off in there. I think it's that middle note that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what this is you just listen. And I mean, it's interesting that, you know, Bill Hader's an impressionist and Mike Judge was a musician.
Yeah.
Like the people that I've tended to really work well with are people who have really good ears.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's cool. What
Yeah.
part of your work do you find yourself, I don't want to say happiest sounds like that, but where do you feel like you have your most energy? Is it on set? Is it in the writing process?
Honestly, it's whatever the next phase is. Like whatever I'm doing now, I hate.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it because I want to get to the next thing. So right now we're writing.
Mm-hmm.
I hate writing. I can't wait to get onto set and start shooting.
Yeah. Are you
And
writing Barry now?
Yes, we were 2 weeks away from shooting season 3 when we got shut down for COVID. So we have since finished writing all of season 3,
Mm-hmm.
and then we've outlined all of season 4. And kind of we have loose rough drafts of those, and now we've gone back and we put it away for a while, and now Bill and I and a couple of writers are working our way through the season 3 scripts again, and then, you know, probably by next week we'll get into season 4 again with a hope toward. I mean, we have no idea when we're going to get the green light again, but hopefully, you know, soon.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you like about being on set, or what are some of the things you've learned along the way about being on set? I think it's hard to explain to, and maybe you can do a better job. My parents are listening, so maybe you can tell them what's that like, because I haven't been able to explain it. But it's such a unique thing.
You're doing an amazing job, Blythe.
Thank you.
Let the record reflect that.
Thank you.
I just needed to say that.
Yeah,
It's the thing that was most surprising to me when I started shooting stuff was, you would think going in that it's like, oh, it's going to be so hard to get this right, or to figure out how to shoot it, or like to get the actor to understand. It's just time. Like that is your only enemy. Like you can prepare all you want. You can figure out, okay, these are the 21 shots I have to get to cut the sequence together.
Yeah.
And then you get there on set and they go, okay, of those 21, what are the 17 that you think you need? Because that's what we have time for. And of those 17, we only have time for 14. And of those 14, which 11 are essential?
Yeah.
Because that's the way. And it just, never once have I walked off a set going like, well, that came together super fast. And we got like, you're always just like, it's super stressful. And it's just, you're paying a huge number of people, a lot of money. It's very restricted. There's a lot of moving parts. Things always go wrong. Like the sun moves, which apparently no one in history has ever realized that the sun doesn't stay in the same place all the time. Right. So your cinematographer will go, oh, we can't shoot that way because of the sun. You're like, if only there was some way of knowing that the sun were going to be over there. But you just don't. It's like, and so that to me was the big surprise, is that was not the one massive limiting factor that I would have expected.
I always remember when writers write dusk, because dusk is about 5 minutes and it's gone.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course. No, I mean, there's that famous, stage direction, Rome Burns, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, you can prepare for a lot, right? And I find being a writer who also directs is a massive help to me, because you don't show up on set and all of a sudden get into an argument about like whether the character's being sarcastic when they say this or not, right? Sure. Because you know what the intention was, and you also know what's really important, right? Because it's not like you just read it and interpreted it and went, oh, okay, it seems like this and this. Like you're like, no. The whole reason that this scene exists is to set up that thing and then that thing. And then next season, when this happens, and then at the end, when that, like, all that stuff, right? Because you're thinking about it. Yeah. But you also have to, on the flip side, again, it's like what's fun about working with musicians. It's about listening. Like I've worked with people who are like, I've outlined it, I've written it, it's this is what it is. And then you get on set and for whatever reason, it just isn't working. And some people are like, well, it has to, because that's what it is. And that's where you end up with kind of tone deaf stuff. And it drives people nuts sometimes. But there are times where, Bill Hader and I have showed up on set, and we have some actors who are very theatrically trained, right? Where like the text is the text. Right. This is it. The words don't change, right? Like you don't get in there and go, well, I think Shakespeare kind of, what he meant was, like, it doesn't happen. It's like, this is it, right? And so they learn it. And if you're trained that way, it's very hard to have spent days memorizing something, right? And show up on set and have somebody go, we're not doing that. Right. But sometimes, and I wish I were better at it, but sometimes you get there on the day and you go, oh, you know what? This is not right. It's not right. He shouldn't be the one who sees her. She should be the one who sees him, right? And the actors go, but that's not what ultimately I feel terrible for them. Like they're very sensitive people. They're paid to be sensitive and access. And you're basically like, you hold them in your hand in a way, like they're not in the edit. I can make you look however I want to make you look later. Mm-hmm. I can make you look terrible if I want to. So they're tremendously scared of that. And they just want to do a great job. And you're making it harder for them. And it's very hard to have that conversation about like, look, for the greater good, you need to be incredibly uncomfortable and terrified right now and do it this way. Because in the end, it's going to be 3% better. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Totally. And so those are, and people rightfully so get very frustrated.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it's also why it's so important to have their trust, which it sounds like you do. I mean,
100%, but even so, it's like, you would think, like you're still putting them in really uncomfortable positions. Yeah. And there is no, you would think it's like, you would think by now, like, I've been married 20 years. You would think, what is there to argue about? We've solved it all. But, you have disagreements. It just is. Yeah. So but you learn how to talk to certain people. Like I was just like everybody who's creative, like the worst thing you can do with creative people is to shut them down, right? Because you want you want the cinematographer to show up and go, okay, I think what would be amazing is if you did this. And you need to be able to disagree with them and go, you know what? I totally understand that, but no. We need to put the camera over here for a reason. Yeah. But if you do it in a blunt way and you're just like, no, we're doing this. Eventually that cinematographer is not going to pour their heart and soul into it. They're just going to go, just tell me what you want. Yeah. And that's death. Like now you've got creative people who are like, I don't care. I just want to leave. What do you want? Yeah. So you have to, it's weird. I always say directing is like stifling creativity because everybody comes in, the wardrobe people are like, look at this dress. Yeah, and you go, that's not right. I'm sorry. No, just jeans and a t-shirt, and the prop guy is like, I went to Chinatown and I found this amazing chess set. And you go, no, it's checkers. I'm sorry. It just has to be for the story. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't make them feel like their input is worthless. Yeah. So a huge amount of it is just managing, egos and temperaments and.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And being able to listen to different voices and balance all of those.
For sure. But also having it clear in your head. I mean, that's the other thing I always say is like, it doesn't matter where a good idea comes from. Right. Like sometimes, one of the actors or an extra or one of the, makeup people will go, oh, what if he did that? And you go, that's so much better than what we have. I'm so dumb. Thank you. Yes, it is. But the flip side is you don't want to basically say to everyone, hey, I just want to hear all your ideas all the time because you got to work. Yeah. So it's that really tricky balance of like people want to feel like you have a point of view. They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel like if they do their job better, it will impact the quality of the piece. Right. And if they do their job poorly, it will impact the quality of the piece. They want to feel like they have skin in the game. Yeah. And you've got to you know, as a whatever director, producer, showrunner, like that's so much of it is like, you know, I want people to feel like they're part of this team and they're helping and like they can make it better. But I also just don't want to listen to bad ideas all day. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Hey, Blythe, we're about 30 minutes out. Do you want to switch over to Q&A now?
I do. I'm going to ask one more question because I want to hear a story of something that went wrong on set that was out of your control. Because every time, it feels like every production, there's something where it's just like a God event because something goes horribly wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this could be 16 hours. I could literally talk about this for the next year. There are two things I can think of immediately. One was when we were at Conan, Jeff Schaefer and I had written a bit. This is a very silly bit where the whole idea was that we would race different animals on this little track to settle disputes. Like at the time, the state of Michigan was suing Dr. Jack Kevorkian because he had helped people commit suicide, and should that be legal or not? And so the idea was like, okay, we're going to take these two hamsters and we're going to race them down this track. This is Michigan. This is Kevorkian. Who's right? And so we would race. And so we had this like plexiglass track built. Again, called the prop guy at 2 a.m. Here's what we need. We need 2 hamsters. We need 2 lizards. We need 2 mice. We need whatever. And we need you to build this plexi thing. So next day you show up, my God, there's the hamsters, there's the mice, there's those guys were, I mean, incredible. But this was going to be the first desk piece. So the show would start, the band would play, Conan would come out, he'd do his monologue, and then he'd walk over to the desk. And before we went to commercial, he'd go into this first piece. So right before the show, we had said to the stagehands, listen, we've got these 2 lizards, okay? Lizards are cold-blooded animals. You have to keep the lizards out in the hallway until right before they work. And because the studio was kept, I don't know if you've ever been to like Letterman was that way, Conan, any of these like things. The studio was like 58 degrees because the lights are hot and people are doing comedy and they don't want to sweat. It's freezing in there.
Yeah.
So the band starts playing, they introduce Conan O'Brien, he comes out and he starts doing the monologue. And my partner, Jeff, and I are standing at the back of the room watching this. And we look over and I go, are those the lizards? And they've wheeled this cart in and they've got the lizards on this thing. And I'm like, monologue's about 7 minutes. And then he's got this whole thing about, did you watch the Oscars, that he's going to talk like these lizards, they're going to be here for 15. And sure enough, when it came time to race, one lizard was it was like Tom Arnold and Roseanne Arnold, who's right in the thing. And Conan, the lizards, it's like they're made out of plastic. They're just
groggy.
Like they were just stiff. And it, and so it's stuff like that. And the other one I was going to very quickly, I know we're running out of time, is we were shooting a thing where, on Barry, where this bus was supposed to light on fire, and the prop guy, the special effects guy, spent like 2 weeks rigging this bus with all these gas pipes and all of these flame bars and all of these things, so that this bus was supposed to ignite and kind of catch fire, grow into this giant inferno. And so he had rigged like 20 different fixtures, and he had this whole control board with all these knobs and things on it. And so that on camera, he's like, we can individually adjust each flame. It can all go on, it can go off. We can turn it on and off in a second. If you want to reset, we can do it. We don't even have to cut camera. You can just turn the fire off. And I mean, this guy must have spent 1,000 hours on this thing. He was super psyched about it.
Yeah.
So take one, and it's 4 a.m. It's super cold. We're shooting on one of the shortest nights of the year. So we have no time. The sun's going to come up. And once the sun gets over that hill, we're done. Yeah. So everyone's really stressed, and we're go. And we do take one of this fire thing, and we're like, okay, flame on. And I'm in this tent with a monitor so that the light from the fire doesn't reflect off the screen. So I'm isolated in this tent, and we do take one, and I go, okay, crank it up. And the bus lights up and this huge flames and whatever. And I go, okay, all right, let's cut and let's go again. And the bus is still on fire. And I said, can we cut? Did they hear it? Is the radio not working? And I come out of the tent and the bus is fully engulfed in flames.
Oh no.
And the special effects guy is running around with a fire extinguisher. The flame bars lit the paint and the vinyl on the seats. And so this bus burned, full on burned, like toxic fumes coming off for like another 20 minutes. And then somebody said, we can't turn the flames on again.
Yeah.
Or it'll just light the bus on fire again. So we shot the rest of the sequence with no flames, and all of the flames that you see were added via computer graphics in post.
That bus was like, I'll give you one take.
So this guy spent 1,000 hours of his life and so much passion and energy and love, and then we just CG'd the flames.
No.
Yeah.
Did you lose a camera? I mean, was the equipment okay?
We did. Oh, that first take. Yes, I forgot about that. We must have talked about this because you've reminded me of exactly. The camera was, the first time we did it, there was a camera inside the bus. And I'm watching, and that's when I said, okay, let's cut. And the flames are still going. And the image starts to get a little brown, and it starts to kind of go, whirr, and then it goes out. And I'm like, that can't be good. Oh. And it turns out, that we baked one of our $50,000 Alexas.
They're not cheap.
And the best thing to come out of it is for the gag reel that season. At the end of the gag reel, the editors put a thing in that said, "In loving memory of Alexa, serial number, blah 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 blah."
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and that shot was the end of the gag reel.
That's great. Well, thanks for indulging me that final question.
Yeah, no, of course.
Wonderful to hear. John, we can do Q&As now if you would like to pop in with one.
Yeah, great. I can kind of run through these really quickly. We have a couple shout outs. Victoria Bohr says,
hello. I wish I could see you.
We also got a quick question. What did you major in college?
I majored in visual and environmental studies, which is basically, I don't think Harvard wanted to have an art major because they felt like too many people would feel like they were spending too much money on something that was utterly and completely worthless. So they gussied it up and called it visual and environmental studies. But basically it was filmmaking, there was photography and design, but I didn't do any of that.
Got it. We got a question from Dave Younger asking if you're ever going to get the Poly Middle School band back together with Sean Bailey, Dave Melby, and I think the band was called Valkyrie.
It was indeed. Wow. Yes. Funny enough, Sean and I were about to play together right before COVID, and then it kind of. So listen, the reunion plans have been put on hold. We had to delay the whole tour, but we'll get out there.
That's great.
We'll be in a city near you, Dave Younger.
I mean, a couple other Poly questions here. Who was your favorite teacher while you were at Poly, like English or otherwise?
Who was I gotta say, I think my favorite teacher, favorite, they were all pretty awesome. Jim Parkman, my English teacher, was probably the guy that, I learned the most from, that I use just in terms of, creativity and being open and,
And then kind of related to that, it feels like from your era, there are particularly a lot of Poly kids that got into showbiz. Do you think there was anything particularly interesting going on at Poly academically at that time that kind of steered people towards that?
I don't know. I think a lot of it is just that it is one of those, like, I started talking about, where it's like you meet somebody and they know somebody, and it is such a business of relationships and, seeing what somebody's doing and going, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I could do, and so I think it happens probably in waves. Like I said, Ted Griffin making the movies he was making and having a mom who worked in the business was part of what got me interested in the business. And, Sean Bailey, who now is the president of production at Disney, was a very close friend. And, I think being around him or him being around me, we were peripheral to it. And I think that probably had something to do with it.
Got it. Blythe, do you want to take over looking through this? Are you have a handle on chat?
Absolutely. And I might consolidate a few, but
Yeah, definitely.
a couple questions that relate to how, not necessarily how to break in, but if you're a young person interested in the industry, are there entry-level jobs in screenwriting, or, do you have to, have a script that you're taking out? Are there books that you recommend reading, things like that?
Yes and no. I mean, it's the best I can say is, like, I can tell you how I robbed a bank, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work if you go and try and rob a bank that way. Like, they've built safeguards into the process to prevent that from happening again. I mean, the surefire things are, if you can write, or even if you can't write, write. Because writing is the one part of the whole process that requires nobody's permission, costs nothing, takes no equipment. No one can tell you not to do it. And it's also the one that will open the most doors. I think it is the hardest part of the whole process, because like I said, it's the one part of the whole thing that goes from 0 to 1. Yeah. You're the one that starts with nothing and creates something. Every other step in the chain is interpretive, right? A director directs a script, an actor acts a part that was written, a studio decides whether to release this or that, an editor cuts something, but the writer is the only one that starts with 0. So it's the easiest way to engender value from nothing. And then the other piece of advice, then it sounds really dumb to have to say it, but just don't be a jerk. Like, I cannot tell you how many people I've met who are like, hey, I wrote a script. I need you to read it and give it to your agent. And then if you could call this guy, and you just go, no, as opposed to if somebody calls, and this is what I always tried to do, and just said, hey, I really admire your work. I feel like this is something I could be really good at. Do you have like 10 minutes where we could just talk a little bit and you could try and give me some sense of I'll do that anytime. Because that's easy. And it's like, that's what I asked for and got. And a lot of really generous people really helped me. And I'm only too happy. And by the way, it's good for me too, because, and I've met people who are really talented people, and you go, oh my God, I can get this person to work for me. And at the end of the day, that's good for me,
Yeah. And I think that's true also to what you said about the freshman class, Don't be a jerk within your freshman class, because as you all rise together.
Of course. Yeah.
Kings and queens of industry. So another question about how do you think the industry will shift given COVID? So what shifts, what do you see happening in the industry going forward?
Well, it's been weird. I mean, it was it came on so fast, and, things got shut down so quick. And, even the shows that have tried to shoot now, I just feel like they're fighting a losing battle. Like, I've just heard so many stories of we went, we were down for 6 months, and finally we were like, okay, we're going to be really careful, and we're all going to wear masks and visors and this and that. And 3 days later, 15 people tested positive and the whole thing, so it's just, and I don't want to freak you out, because I know you're on a location. It's not happening anymore. Right? That's before. There's no surge and there's no new scary strain. That's old. Okay. But what's been interesting is, weirdly, at least from the writing side, intuitively you would think like, oh, well, since production has stopped, the whole conveyor belt has stopped. And at a certain point, the scripts are piling up, and at some point they're going to stop buying stuff. But I think executives feel like, if we stop buying things, then we can't tell our bosses that we're working every day, and we're going to get furloughed. So there is this weird thing of like, I need to tell my bosses that I am necessary and working really hard. So what do you have to sell me, writer? Because I'll buy it.
I think some of the can kicking was related to that. Instead of saying let's shut down and come back in 6 months, it was like, let's kick the can a few weeks to justify having a meeting in 3 weeks or
yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, there was a ton of like, and now I'm dealing with it right now, where there was a ton of stuff of like, you know what, let's just table that until after the holidays. Right.
Okay.
And now we're after the holidays. And so all of a sudden I'm getting, 20, I mean, and this is another piece of advice I would give: deadlines. It's why I do TV more than movies, right?
Yeah.
Because TV, you back time everything from this is when I want to release it, which means this is when it has to be done, which means this is when it has to be shot, which means this is when it has to start shooting, which means this is when it has to be done writing, which means this is when you have to start writing. And I can look at a calendar, for Barry, especially if we've got 2 seasons to produce, like I have a calendar that runs 2 years, where it's all figured out, where it's like, this has to be done and this, and I know people who write spec movies for a living, where they'll just sit around and write something for 3 months and then send it to their agent and go, see if you can sell this. I mean, it would take me 50 years to write a script that way.
Yeah.
There's no way. Like, if I don't have somebody waiting on the other end of the phone going, where is it? It's not getting done.
Yeah.
And that's just something I had to learn about myself, right? Where it's just like, if I haven't promised something to somebody and ideally taken some money for it, it's not happening.
Yeah. We have a good question from Tess Oric about Barry and how you incorporate those funnier moments into what is, that there are darker dramatic pieces in the show. How do you bring the comedy in without it feeling out of place?
Trial and error, honestly. Like, it is just one of those things. I wish there were some manual I could consult, or somebody wrote a graduate thesis when I was at Seinfeld about like the 7 inherent comedic templates of Seinfeld stories and whatever. And it was this like 700-page thing that some, PhD candidate had mailed to one of the writers saying, what do you think? And we kept it in the office. Yeah. And it just was a joke where, like, when something wasn't working, somebody would go, all right, let's figure this out. And, people want to impose order on things, and they want there to be rules, and they want there to be like, no, there's a system. First you do this. Like, it's just easier. And one of the things that the blessing and the curse of what we do is there are no rules.
Yeah.
And as soon as there are rules, somebody will make their hay breaking those rules, because you go, no, it's this. And then all of a sudden somebody does the opposite, and you go, whoa, that's crazy that they did that. That's nuts. I never thought that. It's like if you've ever ridden Space Mountain at Disneyland, there's a thing where like the end of the ride is like 9 right turns in a row. And then a left turn, right? And they get you going like, okay, we're going this way, we're going this, and they lull you into that. And then it almost breaks your neck, that last one, like, because you don't see it coming. And so part of it is like, that's what we do at Barry constantly. We're just sort of like, what would be weird here? Or you know what you wouldn't see coming?
Yeah.
Is, what if that guy dies and no one cares? Or, what if his reaction is not one of horror, but he's bored? Or, and, obviously it has to come from character and be derived from some source, but so much of it is, like I said, just idiots standing at a piano going, ding, 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 ding. No, that's it. That's cool.
Yeah. I love that analogy. This is one from a classmate of mine, Pan. So he said he's heard Jerry Seinfeld talk about taking technology references out of the scripts of Seinfeld so that there was kind of a timelessness to clothing and hair maybe aside, that there is a timelessness to Seinfeld. Do you think about that at all? Do you make that one of your goals in your shows? I mean, obviously Silicon Valley is very of the time and moment that it covered, but do you think about that when creating material?
Not in the sense of like, oh, this should be timeless and live forever. Like, the thing that I'm always very concerned about is, because there's such a lag time between when you write something and when you shoot it and when it airs. The first season of Barry, the pilot of Barry was shot and delivered to the network almost 2 years before it was aired, because there was a whole process with the pilot, and then they had to order the series, and then we had to write the series. And so by the time that pilot aired, it was 2 years old. And if there's any joke in there that's even remotely topical, or, about something that just happened, or even something that like 50 other people have gotten to by the time it airs, it just feels stale, you know? So there's that concern, but I don't think about like, oh boy, if this airs in 20 years, you know, I could be so lucky, right? Like, oh, really? It's going to be dated when millions of people are watching it in 20 years? Who cares? Like, great, people are watching it. That's, you know, that's more than I could wish for.
Yeah, that's great. All right. There's a couple different venues for questions. I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting people. What do you prioritize when you're creating characters?
I mean, it sounds so pretentious, but honesty is really the, like, if you get to know a character well and you can go, that's how they would react. Or if you're writing something, you go, that's not how they would think.
Yeah.
You know, like then it's just about like imbuing them with like a real, you know, opinion and a real like sense of like, oh yeah, that's exactly, you know, and you get those moments where you're like, oh my God, that's such a perfect whatever moment, you know. And the other thing that's interesting when you're building a show is that you want the characters to have distinct voices that kind of, you know, and that certain characters oppose other characters in certain ways. You know, and somebody once told me, and I think it's totally true, that the sign of really good writing is if you can cover all the character names on a page and you read it and you know exactly who's speaking. You know, that's a really, and I could do that with any good Seinfeld script.
Yeah.
If you changed George, Kramer, Jerry, and Elaine to just X's on a script, I could sit down and I could read it and you could tell who every single line is just by how they're speaking.
Yeah.
You know, and that's
same for a viewer fan. I mean, it's so distinctive. Their voices are so
yeah. And like, oh my God, that's such, you know, and those were like, I was lucky enough to get to Seinfeld after it had been established and it was the #1 show in the universe when I got on board. You know, so I got to watch all of that and learn all of that.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to like dig that out of the dirt. It was already up and flying when I got there, and I could just ride the wave of like, but you know, you would come up with stuff and you'd go like, oh my God, that's the best Elaine idea.
Right.
No.
But I mean, what's cool, I think, is that you achieved that both in Barry and in Silicon Valley, in characters that could feel very, you know, if I'm thinking about tech guys, I might think, oh boy, they're all this. And it felt like everyone had such a unique voice on that show, which you could have covered the character names. Just, you know, that's a lovely tribute to, you know.
Well, thank you. I like to think so. I mean, the other thing that's always really interesting to me with characters is just when you think they're one thing, it's always fun to me. Like some of my favorite sort of arcs, like Jaime Lannister on Game of Thrones. If you look at his arc from beginning to end, you know, he started off as this kind of like handsome, smug kind of a-hole. And by the end, he was arguably like the hero of the whole thing. You know what I mean? And he lost his hand and he just was really complicated and complex. You know, we always tried to do that with Gavin Belson on Silicon Valley, that like, yeah, he was kind of arrogant and dopey and evil, but that gets boring after a while. So my favorite stories with him were the ones where you're like, you know, it's like, oh, you see it from his, because the evil people don't know they're evil, right? Like evil characters aren't inherently evil, right? They think they're the heroes, right? Like there's a great, I don't know if you know Mitchell and Webb, the British, you guys did Peep Show. They did a sketch years ago of two Nazis talking, and one of them is realizing that they're the bad guys.
Oh gosh.
You know, are we the baddies? Like, look, we have skulls on our uniform. What are we doing? We're the bad guys. And it's so interesting because bad guys don't, right? They don't know they're bad. So getting in their head and playing it from their side, like we would do that with Gavin Belson, where it's like there were times when he would get screwed over or he'd get fired or he's the victim of something. You know, and just when we made him dopey, like all of a sudden he was super formidable and smart about something.
Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
it's always fun to, like, if you've played one direction, like to suddenly go, oh, the guy that everyone thinks is the loser, that guy's the most powerful guy in the room now.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's very fun. Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Let me. Oh, that's just a comment. Another comedy assassination show with a poly connection was Gross Point Blank, starring John Cusack, edited by Brian Burden, class of 1979.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. How did you experience writing for the Harvard Lampoon? How did that experience shape the scripts you wrote in the future? So can you talk a little bit more about your Harvard Lampoon?
Yeah. I mean, the Lampoon is the process of getting on that. You have to basically compete to get it. You have to sort of audition for that, and you have to write 3 comedy pieces, which can be, an article or a fake, menu or whatever it is, but 3 pieces, and then everyone who's on the staff reads them and gives you some feedback. And then usually I'd say about 80 people start that process. And then there's a cut after the first 3 pieces, and they cut down to 35 or 40 people. And then you submit another 3 pieces. And then there's another cut down to 10 or 12 people. And then they deliberate. And usually out of the 80 or 90 people that start the process, 5 or 6 writers get on what they call staff. And there's 3 boards. There's a business board, which is really more about selling ads and administering. There's an art board, which is, people draw and paint or whatever. And then there's the literature board, which is what I was on. So the first thing that it teaches you is just, there's a deadline here, right? Like, I have to do this. Like, I need to write 3 things. And I'm guessing that 300 people set out to try and do it, and only 70 or 80 actually do the work of writing 3 things.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. It is hard.
And you have schoolwork on top of that.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that you get very thin skin when people are like, you'll submit the piece and you would print it and you would leave it on the floor of the library of the building. And people would come in who worked on the magazine, they would read pieces and they'd just write comments on the back. So you'd come in every once in a while and you'd find your piece lying in a pile and you'd look and you'd read all these comments on the back.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable and kind of scary and, but you have to learn to sort of like, okay, that guy didn't like that. Is it because he's wrong, or is it because I'm wrong, or is it just a taste issue? Right. Yeah. So you learn to take criticism. And then the other thing I learned once I got on staff is, when you're putting out a publication, you don't just write 5 things and publish them, right? Like, the amount of rewriting and crafting and, comedy writing in particular is 2 phases, right? There's the inspiration phase, which is just like, oh my God, this is a great idea.
Yeah. And
then there's just elbow grease, right? Where it's just like, okay, now I have to take this and work it and work it and work it and work it and work it. Right. And there's that Mark Twain quote about, if you want me to talk about something for 2 hours, I can do it now. But if you want me to talk about it for 5 minutes, I'm going to need to prepare for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that's what it is. It's like, I can just vomit stuff out, but it's not going to be good, and actually doing the work. And, if you show something to somebody and they go, honestly, I think you could cut the first half.
Yeah.
Like, if you've written one thing, somebody just told you to cut half of everything you've ever written.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But after you do it for a while, you just go, yeah, that's right. It's garbage. Cut it. And there is like this sunk cost fallacy also, right? Which is like, I've worked for so long on this. And, when you're shooting stuff, it's like, we just spent $1 million on that scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
was it $1 million?
So it doesn't belong in the movie. Cut it. Right. It doesn't make the movie better.
Yeah.
And by the way, the movie's always going to be $1 million more expensive, whether that's in it or not. Like, you don't get the money back, but you can make the movie better by losing that very, very expensive thing and chalk it up to experience. Don't shoot it next time.
Yeah.
But, you got to cut it. Yeah. And so that to me is just the discipline to be brutal and ruthless. Like, that I learned from the Lampoon. It's like, a lot of smart, funny people would go, that thing you wrote is garbage, and
Yeah.
you'd have to either listen or defend it, or, you know, learn to take criticism. It wasn't just this thing of like, oh my God, we're such a great community of artists and everything you do is great and everything it was the opposite. People are like, you stink.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I don't stink, you stink. And you
Yeah.
would have to prove it.
Yeah. It's good preparation for the industry because you're going to get it.
For sure. You learning how to collaborate and how to not take it personally,
Yeah.
and to be really hard on the material.
Yeah. Yeah. How much more time do I have, John? Do I have time for a couple more?
Yeah, you can do a couple more. I mean, we're at 5. We're pretty much done. But if you want to, if Alec has time, we can run through a couple more. Whatever.
I'm locked in my house, man. I don't know where to be.
We're here all night.
Yeah, let's do a couple more, and then we'll.
I could do this for another 3 or 4 months. The only thing stopping me is the vaccine. If that shows up, I'm cutting it short. But until then, here I am.
So I have. I'll ask one more, and then I want to go back to Jen. We can maybe just talk about. Well, I'll ask one first, and then I'll say what I was going to say. This is a general one, and you've answered it a little bit along the way with each individual script. But how do you talked about that inspiration phase? How does that come about? So it sounds like you've worked with partners and you kind of develop things together. But do you wake up in the middle of the night? How do you come up with the script ideas?
Sometimes. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just literally things pop into your. It's very hard to know where. Sometimes you're thinking about, oh, I need a reason for this to happen, and then you see somebody online or something, and you go, oh, hey, that's it's like you have a hole of a certain weird shape, right? And it's like I need something that fits in that. And sometimes you'll see something and go, oh my God, that's the thing that fits in here. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you'll see like a really weird, interesting looking thing, and you go, I wonder what that could go in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of it is just, I mean, and I told you, Larry David had this notebook, and he is relentless about just writing every idea he has. Cause you never know, like, Jeff Schaefer and I would have ideas lying around in the hopper for years, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my God, this is the girl who doesn't swing her arms when she walks. That can go here. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's one of those things where that, and so you just have to, constantly just be kind of semi-awake and listening, and always open to the better idea, I think. Yeah. And sometimes, like I said, with Barry, like it started with Bill and I both had the same agent, and I had a show at HBO and he had a deal at HBO, and we were like, we should do something. And we just started having breakfast like once a week, just talking about things we liked and what is out there. Like, what would he want to play, or what kind of show might, and it just like, it grew from there. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes people just go, oh my God, I just had this amazing idea. It's this and this and this, and you kind of like, how do you take this thing that you thought of and make it real?
Right.
And again, it's for me, it's deadlines are super helpful, because it's just like, okay, I have to generate something. And I've never, people always talk about writer's block, whatever that is. It's like, if you have to deliver something, you just don't have the luxury of that, right? So it's like, okay, well, let's write the bad version of this. This is what I said about like working it. It's like, okay, this is the terrible version of it.
Right.
Put that in, write that. So you have something, right? It's like base camp on Everest. It's like, okay, at least we're here, right? And then we'll try and get a little further up the mountain each day. Yeah. And sometimes you find a crack and you go halfway up the mountain in a day. I mean, that is the exhilarating and the infuriating thing about the creative process is I can't tell you how many times. I mean, there's a Seinfeld idea. I'll give you a specific. Yeah. Jeff Schaefer and I had been working for like 3 days on, I can't even remember what we were trying to solve, but it was some idea that wasn't working. And I was just like, all right, to hell with it. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go across the street to the La Salsa. I'm going to get a burrito. I'm going to get some air. And I ordered a burrito and I paid for it. And I took $1 and I'm putting it toward the tip jar, and the guy turns around and I drop it in the tip jar. And I was like, can I get my hand into the jar and get it back out before that guy turns around so that I can put it back in where he sees it. So he knows, because now he's going to turn back around and think I didn't tip him because he didn't see. And I just went, this is the thing. This is the thing. And I like sprinted. And it was one of those where it's like, we spent 3 days pounding on something and got nothing. And as soon as I put the weight down, I get lifted over my head, you know, which really is dangerous because it becomes a real justification for procrastinating sometimes.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right. But I've also come to like, I've come to know my brain well enough over the years to know when I sit down, there are days where I'll just go, I don't have it.
Yeah.
Like I'm tired. I can feel it. I could sit here for another 6 hours, and at the end of 6 hours, I'll have garbage and I'll be more tired.
Right.
And sometimes there are other things you can work on where you go, you know what? I'm going to just do the busy work of like my schedule or whatever it is, just something that doesn't require creativity. And sometimes you just go, it's not happening today.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to give yourself the leeway to, you know, to not beat yourself up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The question that I wanted to kind of end on, because we have kind of a mix of poly alumni and, you know, parents, but we also have some students who are watching, and I imagine that there are probably a few who are interested in this as a career path. So what would you say to them? And you said a little bit along the way, but if you were to just kind of boil it down, like, you're interested in this work, you know, what's your best advice?
I mean, like I said, I can't emphasize enough that writing is the way in. It's also, even if it isn't the way in, if you understand the writing process, everything else is interpretive.
Yeah.
You have to understand, like, find, and it's easy now with the internet, find scripts of things that you like, you know, think about how they're put together, think about how they're made, think about what, you know, why is that the way it is? Like, take stuff apart, you know, and think about it. And I would also say one of the things that benefited me a lot just as a writer is working on the Harvard Lampoon wasn't screenwriting. You know, I was writing like fake diary entries and like, you know, whatever, just, you know, fake history books and just other weird stuff. Screenwriting is a very constrictive form. Like, it's not, I had a very interesting conversation years ago with David Ebershoff, who was my year at Poly, who's a very successful novelist. And we were just talking about the process and the idea of collaborating, like him working with a bunch of people and he's like, that I can't, how would you do that? So part of it is, I think, the more you write, the more you learn, oh, I can do this with this person. This works for me.
Yeah.
But you only learn that by doing, right. You know? And again, just going back to screenwriting being a constrictive form, screenwriting that's not the end. Like David Ebershoff, a novelist, like what he's writing, the reason that he didn't want people messing with stuff is like, this is it. Yeah. When I'm done, this is the thing. This is the art form. But screenwriting is like writing instructions, right? I mean, it's really like writing recipes is what it's like, is you're writing a recipe for a souffle, right? Yeah. And then either you're lucky enough to go to the supermarket and buy all the ingredients yourself and then bring them home and cook them. Yeah. And you're the author of that thing, so to speak, right? Or you have to turn that recipe book over to somebody and go, okay, you need to go to the supermarket and buy all these things. And who knows whether they're going to buy the right ones or not. Or like, you know, they don't know what a fresh melon is, so they buy a rotten one, you know, and that impacts the thing. And then they hand those ingredients over to a chef who cooks it, right? But what you're writing is not, it's not the end product, right? So a lot of times, you know, like I used to talk to people who were like, you know, whatever, I'd meet people in high school who are like, I want to write screenplays. And it's like, boy, I would really encourage you to write, like, just write other weird stuff while you don't have to earn a living doing this.
Yeah.
You know, like just learn to write weird stuff. It's going to make you a better writer, you know, and screenwriting it's a very restrictive, like, you know, it's not like writing a novel or writing whatever. Like it has to serve a purpose which, free form prose doesn't.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's terrific advice.
And I like, someone who's 14 who wants to write sitcom scripts. It's like, boy, there's going to be plenty of time for that.
Yeah.
You can write things that have to be exactly 24 pages and have a cold open and 3 acts and you know what I mean? Like, it's all like, that's imposed on you and it's not natural. It's because the form is very rigid.
Right.
So learning to be restricted like that is not, I think, maybe good at first.
Yeah. Because it could become formulaic and having that sort of broader creative experience.
Yeah. And again, it's like there are rules, but the most exciting things are the things that break the rules. And that's what's so fun to me about, like, I'm a big fan of that show Atlanta. And Bill Hader and I would watch Atlanta.
Yeah.
And we just go, oh my God, did you see that? Did you see what they did? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, what can we do to expand from what we're doing? Or how do we make this not like a sitcom? How do we, how do we make this like awesome like that?
Yeah. What are some other shows that you're inspired by right now? Like you mentioned Atlanta. Are there other shows that you're feeling particularly?
What am I watching now that, I gotta say there was a period early on in the run of The Simpsons, like season 3 to about 8.
Yeah.
That I would say, there's not an episode in that run that isn't, I would watch that and I would honestly get depressed. Cause it's like when I first moved to LA and I was trying to do it.
Yeah.
And I was specifically, for whatever reason, moved to LA to be a half-hour television writer. That's what I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And of course, that's all gotten much more fluid. And like when I started, there were half-hour writers, there were hour writers, and there were feature writers. And they did not mingle. Yeah. It was weird. You'd go to a party and it'd be like, oh, this is an hour drama party. And you would know no one there.
You're in the wrong.
Yeah. It was super weird. And then I'd go to the half-hour comedy party. I go, hey, I know everybody here. So it's gotten more fluid. But when I moved to LA to be a half-hour comedy writer, I would watch those episodes of The Simpsons and I just go, what's the point? Why am I doing this? I could write for 100 years and never do something as good as that.
Yeah, it's a special show. Yeah. Oh, well, this has been wonderful. Thank you. Good. John, did you have anything else you wanted to, did I miss?
No, this was amazing. So yeah, just thanks to you both for doing this, and thanks for everyone who joined. I hope everyone enjoyed this, and stay tuned for the next one. We're going to hopefully be announcing another virtual alumni speaker series session in a couple months. So have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you.
You got it. My pleasure.
The wave.
Is that it? Are they gone? Are we done?
Yeah, you can log off.
Thank you so much, you guys.
It's so weird. It's so weird to be talking to, like.
I could technically mute you and turn off your video for you.
Oh, I can just.
We're all good.
Hey, that
There's
was
like
great.
40
Thank
people
you.
left.
Thank you.
So
That
much.
was wonderful.
That was so fun.
I feel like we could have gone on, thank you so much for being willing to go over. I feel like we could have gone on for another hour even.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
awesome.
of course. No, my pleasure. Thank you guys for putting it together. That was
It was really fun.